consciousness, meaning your self-awareness is the most important thing, because it's, are you being honest with yourself first and foremost? That's that's like the biggest thing. Are you being honest with yourself? So for me, I'm out here right now in Asheville, North Carolina, having just gone through a breakup, being single for the first time, having women messaging me and sitting with the honest question of, do I actually want to hang out with this person, or am I lonely?
This is The Deep Dive with Adam Roa.
What's up, deep divers? Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Deep Dive Podcast. I am your host, Adam Roa, and today I have the one and only Case Kinney with me. And Case was just recently on the a panelist with me on the Create Festival, our 4-day online transformational festival, and we did a workshop on conscious dating. And it was so fire that basically we said, let's just keep it going. Let's keep it rolling and dive into relationships and that sort of thing. How you doing today, Case?
Great. I'm fantastic. Yeah. Thanks for having me back. And yeah, I was thinking, actually, I was really moved by that spoken word you had at the end of the panel. That was really great. I'd love to actually see that if you'd be willing to share it. But yeah, I'm glad to continue having the conversation. I love this stuff. So
yeah, thanks, brother. I have a lot of poetry, a lot of different things. It's that thing. It's the way that I personally really express and and just want to acknowledge and appreciate all of the Create community members who are here live as we're recording this. Sending love to you, fam. Way to show up. And if you need anything, please just type it in the chat. Maybe we'll get to your questions along the way. But Case, I dive right in with you, brother. I think, the workshop that we led on conscious dating, our focal point was kind of the do's and don'ts. Right? The do's and don'ts of being single, the do's and don'ts of being in a relationship, the do's and don'ts of a breakup. And so for me, one piece that we really didn't touch on that I think could be an interesting spot for us to start is with the question, how do you know that he or she is the right one for you? How do you know that they are a fit, or how do you know they're not a fit? What are the green flags, the red flags? What are the things that we're looking for? How do we evaluate that? As so many people are in that dating process and asking that very question. So why don't we start with that? Why don't you just tell everybody how they can know?
Yeah, super simple. Here's what you want to do. Well, I think it's funny too, because in talking the other day about do's and don'ts, we also landed on the fact that there truly is no right or wrong way. It's all about what is true to you and what you discovered yourself versus taking someone else's word for what is right for them. Right. So it's funny that, it's all related. So in tune with that, I've thought a lot about this topic. I just released a podcast on it. I think it is a matter to know if someone is right for you, whether that means they are your person or, you should probably continue to explore this. I think the truth, as cheesy as it is, 100% lies in you. And it doesn't lie in you in the sense that you need to sit down and just consider that person. I think it literally is as simple as looking at yourself and evaluating your reaction and how you're acting around them. The cliche line is that person bringing out the best in you or the worst in you? And I think that's a really telling sign, because of all the things in life that are unknown to you or confusing to you or ambiguous to you. I think we know ourselves pretty well. I think we know the good aspects of ourselves. I think we know the bad aspects. I think we know the parts of us that need work, but I think it's pretty obvious to us. And I think if we ask ourselves that question in relation to that person, it could reveal some pretty telling things. And I was thinking about this the other day. In fact, I've been talking to this one woman, and I kind of realized that whenever I texted her or talked to her, or after I hung out with her, I was just very anxious and unsure, very unclear about my feelings toward her. And that I was starting to feel negative aspects of myself. I wouldn't say jealousy, but those kinds of things. And I was that's I know myself pretty well. And that's not a good sign myself that I'm seeing these feelings and these qualities of mine come to the surface. So it's a simple thing. And it's obviously not black and white, because I think typically what we experience is you'll see good qualities of yours and bad qualities of yours come out. But I think turning inward rather than looking at a lot of the outward things we face with your checklists or like super evaluating their character and things like that. I think a simple question just to ask yourself is that person bringing out the best or worst in me? When I think about a future with that person, am I experiencing the best or worst aspects of myself? So I think that's like a super simple starting point.
So where do you fall in this space of, okay, I'm noticing jealousies coming up in me and saying they're bringing up jealousy for me versus, wow, this is mine to fully own and deal with. And it's not an indication necessarily of their impact. Like this is something that's existing in me. Where's that line for you?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I mean, I think it's not being like, well, they're making me jealous, therefore they're wrong. I don't think it's ever a blame game like that. I think it's like, hey, like I am feeling, let's hone in on the jealous part. I'm feeling jealous about this person when I'm interacting with her or engaging with her or whatever. I think that's on you to then evaluate why you're feeling that way. Is it something that she is doing, or is it something from your past that you haven't calculated yet? Either way, it doesn't necessarily mean like that person is acting out and has a negative quality. It could just mean lack of compatibility, or to your point, like, or to yourself, maybe you're not in the right mind space or like the head space to understand it. So, I mean, I think the idea first is to surface those qualities and then address them second. And I think a good place, of course, would be like an egoless place of looking at yourself rather than being like, oh, well, I'm feeling jealous, therefore she's making me jealous, therefore that's a fault on her end, versus, okay, maybe I'm not fully healed from something, or maybe, I am overreacting. Maybe this is on me. I need to check myself. I shouldn't be feeling this way, but I am feeling this way. Either way, it's just a very mindful exercise.
So in your like personal experience that you brought up here, where you're noticing, wow, I'm experiencing some jealousy in relation to this woman, which isn't quite normal for me. What is your process right now around that? Are you looking at that like, wow, maybe I actually care more about this woman than I've cared about others in the past? Are you looking at that as, oh, wow, she has behaviors that actually just I don't like? Or what is your evaluation of that situation for yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, this I'm super transparent about it. I was like going on a couple of dates with this one woman, hit it off pretty casual, but like definitely getting along and like definitely excited to explore more together casually. And then like we would go out, and then, there, like I would text her, and, it would take her 8, 10, 12 a day to respond. And to me, like that, it just started to be like, oh, okay, maybe that's an indication she's not interested. But then in like the truest millennial form, she would be out on Instagram and like hanging out and doing all these things. I was like, okay, well, maybe she's not only not interested, but she's interested in someone else. And you start devolving in this thought process. So my first step was, when I think about her, I'm feeling frustrated right now because I'm feeling either a little resentful that I'm not getting the attention, that I'm not receiving the attention that I'm giving, and then I'm getting jealous in the sense that maybe she's directing it elsewhere. Have those feelings. I mean, I solved the problem in an instant. I just called her. I was like, hey, what's going on? Like, I'm not, I text you, it takes forever. Like, it's totally cool if you're not, whatever. And then we address the issue. So, I mean, I'm very big on like communicating, of course, the simplest thing that you can control in the world. But, there was nothing accusatory. It was taking time to be like, ooh, here's how I'm feeling. Those aren't good qualities. How can I address them? I'm going to talk about them quickly. And it wasn't like a weird conversation. It was super great, frankly.
Yeah. And so what was the issue? I'm curious what she responded with, and if there was a resolution that let's tie this up for everyone.
Yeah. So the resolution was that when we had first met and talked, like we were both talking about intentions, and something I said when we first met made her think that I was like super uninterested and wanting to keep things like super, super casual. She thought that I was that way. Therefore, she was like returning that energy to me in the way that she thought was appropriate, which was like just not, be that communicative. So it was a miscommunication in that sense. And, who knows if it's a serious thing between us. I have no idea, but like we kind of squashed that from a communication perspective.
Communication is really interesting. I had in my last relationship, there was a communication issue. There was a distinct communication issue. And it came from, I feel like all communication issues generally stem from fear right? Just fear of, like, people set a boundary of, this is how much I can communicate. And that boundary is almost always based in a fear of what would happen if I communicated beyond that point. Right. And so even in your situation, there's the communication was, oh, he wants it to be super casual. And so therefore, if I over communicate, or if I text back too soon or whatever, he might think I'm trying to get something more. And so now she's trying to navigate. Do you believe that there are, like, where do you decide what are healthy boundaries for communication, and where do you decide that those boundaries are actually really fear-based and holding back? Because I've come from a world of relationships where basically you communicate so openly, just fully transparent. This is all of me, my entire heart, all of that. And then to be in a relationship where, quite honestly, only through the breakup did I realize how much wasn't communicated, that it brought me to, wow, I guess I've been living in a bubble of how most people communicate. And so I'm curious for you where that line is in communication, and what your thoughts are around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, I wish I had a better answer, because I think, I've been single for 3 years. I've been in many relationships. If I and my partner had got it completely right, I wouldn't, be talking about it in this sense. I think it's really tough to get two people on the very same communication page. I think it's really tough. Like, dating is the toughest thing in the world. You've got two people with very distinct and unique pasts. And then you've got two people with two very distinct intentions for the future. So you've got all these things that are very dynamic and could include baggage, could include character insecurities and everything. So I think it's really, really tough. I think I've grown myself to say that, any lack of incentive to communicate, I think it comes from a fear that it's not reciprocated. I think that's all it is. I think there's a fear of over communicating, of course, and having it not be matched. I mean, I think that's everyone's fear. The reason that a lot of times people wait in a relationship to define it, of course, is because they're afraid that if they ask to define it in a committed way, the other person might not, and that's potentially devastating, or at minimum, very awkward for you. So, I mean, I think it always comes from mismatched expectations. But I think the biggest check we have in place is to me, I've grown this way. I think a lack of communication is the same as indifference. And I think maybe we even talked about this last time. I think indifference is the worst way to live your life in every sense of it. I really truly believe that, if you've got it, you should flaunt it in a way. And especially when it comes to intentions and what you want and what you deserve. So that's how I've grown. I don't have a great answer, because I'm incredibly guilty of this. I think every relationship of mine that I was in, that was a committed relationship, came down to lack of communication. I think a lot of times I was at fault when I was younger in that sense, but I've grown to see lack of communication to be very similar to indifference. And I'm at war with indifference in my life, in everything. It's if I want something, I'm going to do something to try to get it. If I have an ability to impact someone or something, I'm going to try, and everything. We're talking business, we're talking creative life, we're talking everything. And to leave that mentality out of a relationship, I think is really dishonest to myself. So I really try to push myself on that and try to be honest, and it's awkward. I think it's very awkward. A lot of that, it's so necessary at this point.
And what's funny is most people come from the space of actually being afraid to communicate more. I would say 99% probably of relationships fall into that. I don't want to communicate all of me. I'm one of those interesting 1% cases where I come from the other direction, where I think that my learning has been in not communicating everything. You know what I mean? When I after this last relationship, realizing, wow, there wasn't enough of a foundation of conscious communication and enough of a foundation of a shared reality and an understanding of a shared future together and like viewing the same mountaintop and all of those things, there wasn't enough of a solid foundation for that level of communication to feel safe. Right. And so if I'm voicing the parts of myself that are like have doubt or are uncertain about certain futures or, any of those sorts of things, I'm voicing them because my background, 10 years in a relationship where we were the most like we were a public couple that were giving workshops on like communication and how this thing. And so that's my come from. And so I've learned that while I do think that open, transparent, honest communication is the bedrock of a healthy relationship, that there's a timing to it. There is an understanding of, it's kind of like you have, this is weird. Maybe this is the best one. This is what's popping in my head literally in this moment. I've never thought of this, but if you have a glass that's just held a bunch of cold water or whatever, or hot water, and then you put in cold water and it breaks, or the other way around, right? The glass just breaks. Similarly, it's in understanding your container and the temperature of your container that you have in this relationship before you add scalding hot, hey, I'm not sure if blah, 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 or I'm having this doubt. And I think reading that temperature is something that I'm taking away now into the conscious communication, conscious dating space. And so I just wanted to speak that because I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast are coming from a space of wanting a lot of open communication.
Super interesting. I'm interested in understanding that a little bit more. So you're saying there needs to be a receptiveness to that like communication, like energetically, there needs to be an openness to it.
Yeah. So I believe that the communication itself can, it's not really about what's actually said. So if I'm with someone for 10 years, by year 4, 5, we were able to say, I could say anything. And do you know what I mean? Like I could literally say anything and we were in a spot where it's like, okay, that's just what's alive and true right now. Let's have that conversation. And the thing is that if I had said that at the 6-month mark, it may have ended the relationship. And so it's not actually about what is said. I think it's about the container in which it is said. And that is something that is one created, but is also something that's discovered between two people. Like if I'm speaking to someone who's never had a conscious relationship and is coming from a world in which every single time they voice let's say they come from a family where if they speak their truth, their family shames them for it. Let's say that they've been in relationships where every time they voiced certain aspects of their truth, they were made to feel bad about it. Well, they're going to naturally hold stuff back, right? And understanding that they're bringing that history as the way in which they communicate is important, because then I have an understanding of, oh, okay, I get to go easier in my communication as opposed to jumping right into it like high intensity interval training, the communication version.
Super interesting. So like one of the things that I like really consider like to the theme and then to dive into that, I'm really curious on your perspective here. It's like good and like challenging for me. I think like one of the things that I ask myself in this whole is it meant to be thing, my question is like in the current existence, the reality of this person I'm dating, if nothing were to change, is that good enough for me in every sense of it? Our dynamic, our compatibility, our attraction, everything. If nothing were to change, is that good enough for me? And I guess in regards to that, if in the moment I'm like throttling back a little bit on my communication and kindly subtly in the back of my head being like, I wish I could be more open, but it's too early to be open. how does that fit into that, knowing if something is meant to be, if you still have this inkling of wanting to communicate, but knowing that we probably need to wait and get to that point, you know what I mean? Like, how do you balance that within that equation?
It's a great question. And I think that discernment is the key. The discernment is the key, because here's the thing. When you're in your first sexual encounter with someone that you're dating, for example, is that the time to let them know that you want to do bondage and be dominated? Do you know what I mean? Like,
it's a good analogy.
and my point is that we're doing it already. So you are someone who's a full fan of open, honest communication, the same as I am. And yet both of us have an innate understanding of when is an appropriate time to share certain parts and not other parts, right? Yeah. And that's why I use that extreme example. So we're still doing it. And I think that that's important to get across to people, because being someone who is a stand for open, authentic communication does not mean that you communicate all of it right away in every moment. There still is a pacing to it. And I think that's the thing that I missed in my kind of last dynamic, was I went into it with the same level of openness and honesty and like, oh, we're in this together, which means that I can voice all of my fears and doubts and insecurities, and we're going to navigate that together. Instead, that just triggered all kinds of shit that we didn't have the foundation built to navigate those things. And it would have been healthier in hindsight, had I wanted to continue with the relationship, for example, to take those fears, insecurities, doubts to my inner circle to process a lot of it, and then know with discernment how to bring it to the relationship. Because it's not about not bringing it. It's about understanding the temperature so you know how to bring it and kind of titrating that.
I really like that. Yeah, that's like a very conscious way of evaluating, but it's also super pragmatic and realistic. I think a lot of times we get lost in like fairy tale visions of like who we want to be and how we want to be. And when we're not matching it, we feel like something's wrong within communication, right? It's like, I dream of having a partner who I tell everything about and we know everything about each other. And then in the immediate, when we're lacking that, maybe we feel like it's not meant to be. But to your point, there is a progression to get to that point. Just because you're not there yet, it doesn't mean there's something lacking in your relationship. It's the ability and the balance to make that mental distinction between the two. And, you know, in the sense that you're moving towards that, you know, that having that ability and that energy to communicate that. I really like that. That gives me something to think about. Like
Thanks,
that.
brother. That's I think that bringing these conversations, the whole reason I started this podcast is because humans like you are doing incredible shit in the world. You and I can get on a conversation and actually both grow from this conversation. And that's why I started this podcast. And I'm so appreciative of you exploring that with me. And so let's build on this a little bit. And so let's say that you've started dating someone. You are communicating openly and honestly in those things. What are we now looking at as evaluating markers of if this person is right or wrong? And at what stage for you personally are you going, yeah, this isn't it? Or like, is there an amount of time? Is it because when you made a point, I noticed it when you said about the woman that you're currently texting with or whatever, the way you said it was 3 times. You went casually dating, casually. And the way you said it, I caught that. And I'm curious what that means to you. And so like the way in which that you approach it, because I guess my question is also in understanding your intention. Are you open to meeting something that someone that could be a long-term relationship? Yeah, absolutely. I'm very open. This one, I think, has moved in the direction of casual, just given a lot of elements of COVID and, you know, what she's doing in her life and potentially moving and things like that. But I think one of the big things that I asked myself, that can't remember if we talked about it last time, but even like when you're in a relationship, let's call it early stages of a relationship, I think it's still a very, very important question to ask yourself is whether you're dating, whether you're in that specific relationship for attention or for something more. I think a lot of times we really confuse the two. We confuse attention and compatibility. Like I consider myself to be a pretty centered, confident man, but I'm a sucker for a compliment. If you compliment me, I'm like, oh shit. Like it just blinds me. It's amazing. I think that's true with a lot of people, right? Like
a compliment goes a long way. Being told you're talented or beautiful or amazing or hilarious or whatever, like, I don't know what it does biologically, but it definitely like tricks us into like, not tricks us. It definitely catches our attention in a very serious way. And I think if we don't take the time to evaluate what it is that we're doing and what it is that we're expecting, we can be like, well, you know, he or she is very complimentary of me. He or she is clearly obsessed with me. He or she is very nice. Like, those are great qualities, but I think any relationship should have those things. Like, that's like the bare minimum. The bar is low. You should have someone who is obsessed with you, is complimentary of you, who vocalized that, and of course, who is nice and kind. Those are givens. I don't think like you get in a relationship with someone, though, I don't think those are the reasons why you should continue in a relationship. I'm not saying, you know, you should all of a sudden be like, peace, I'm out, just because that's all they're giving you. But like, I think you're in a relationship. How do you know if it's meant to be? How do you know if it's meant to be continued? Well, I think the first thing you should ask yourself is like, am I getting more than just attention and a nice person right now? Is there an opportunity to dive deeper than that? And I just think it's a powerful question. I mean, I was on a podcast yesterday talking to a woman who was like, she finds it very difficult to end relationships with men casually, because she's like, they're just so nice. And like, I don't want to be mean to them. And it's like, first of all, like, I know it's tough and it's awkward, but it's like, someone who's nice to you, that doesn't mean they're your life partner. That is the starting point of everything. That is not the like continuing point. So anyway, I'm going around.
The bar is incredibly low. For like legitimately, and I think this is more the case for men. Honestly, men have set the bar really freaking low for other men. Like I am amazed at hearing some of the dating stories that my female friends have experienced, and the level of, like, let's just talk about the dick pic, for example. Like that is a thing. That is just a thing that men have started to do, where it's basically like, I'm going to throw out a penile fishing lure and just see if anyone will bite. You know what I mean? And it's because it's like this crazy world that we're living in. And I think social media itself has transformed it, because you can, social media, dating apps, whatever, it now becomes this massive numbers game, where before, what did you have to do? You actually had to physically go up to a woman and say, hey, I would love your number, or would you like to get coffee, or whatever it is. And now there's this whole other world of social media, and men have just really, I'm going to speak to all you men right now. Get your shit together. Get your shit together. Stop. You know what? Don't even go on dates until you feel like you can show up in a way that's honoring of the person you're on a date with. If you feel that you need to go on a date to prove something to yourself or your friends, if you feel like you need to go on a date to like feel powerful or masculine or dominate or anything like that, get your shit together, take a sabbatical from dating, and then work on that stuff. And here's the crazy thing, guys. If you do that, you will wind up getting laid way more often. You will wind up having women contacting you, wanting to actually pursue you. And all of the things that you're trying to achieve by acting in a certain way will come to you 10x. And on top of that, you will stop fucking it up for everybody else and creating trauma and wounding in women and having them enter with walls up and experiencing things, so that like when I get in a relationship with someone, I'm not dealing with someone who feels like they can't actually be honest with me because their last partner couldn't handle it. So please get your shit together.
Preach it. Preach it. Yeah, I've got feelings on that for sure. Yeah, I mean, so my whole thing is like, we're getting into the territory of like talking about like a fuckboy, like what you just described as fuckboy. And of course there is such a thing as a fuck girl as well, but majority lands in the men's realm, of course. And it's like, my whole thing is like, you say that someone is a fuckboy, someone is having fuckboy type behavior. I'm like, you're not a fuckboy, you're a sad boy because you have these insecurities that you're taking from your past. So a lot of times, I mean, it's to your whole point. It's like men often, and I'm guilty of it as well, of course, is you're trying to prove something. Like your actions are driven by a need for validation. And women do the same thing as well, but men are just much more egregious and flaunt it with just such lack of intention. And there's that desire. I don't know if we're talking primal desire to conquer, or it's just a validation. It's a proof that I could do this. I slept with her. Congrats to me. Or I got her number and whatever. I mean, it's rampant, particularly with dating apps. Like the amount of times I hear that, a guy is super outgoing and enthusiastic just to get a number and then never texts or never sets anything up. Like that's like a very low key example of that. And then there's the example of, they sleep with the woman and then never hear back from them. That's example 2. You call that ghosting, or you call that just like that's a man acting out on those things. But I really do think all of those things we just described, and that's why I think it's funny to call fuckboys sad boys instead, because it really does come from prior. I mean, I hate to drop into cliches, but I mean, it's like prior pain, baggage, insecurities, self-doubt, low self-esteem, you name it. And I think it takes a bigger man to admit that about themselves, that they're literally acting out. You're not doing those things because you're a man and that's what you're meant to do. You're doing those things because you have unhealed, unaddressed issues. And a lot of the times, all it materializes in is just lack of intention. And that's not a crime against humanity. That's just something you need to be better about. That if you truly have no intention with someone, I don't think you should be acting on it. If you have poor intention for someone, you of course shouldn't be acting on it. But I think you're doing everyone a disservice when you're dating or hooking up and you have no intention and you're not communicating it. I don't have a problem if you want to be a fuckboy and you're like, hey, lady, I want to hook up with you and that's it. And you communicate that. Okay, that's cool. But like the opposite of that and like leading potential on, I mean, those are all derived in my mind from past insecurities and lack of present intention.
Yeah, I think that it's important when we're, I like calling the fuckboys sad boys, by the way. We're going to need to put an explicit on this, this episode. But the reason why I like calling them sad boys is because I actually would love to see losing that taboo around people who are actively just going like dating because they want to have physical sexual encounters. I think that there's so much shame around that, around sexuality in general, making it taboo and shamed, that a lot of men and women too. So women think that if they just start dating because they want to have sexual encounters, there's like a slut shaming thing that happens. And then on the men's side, if you just are saying, yo, I'm in this period where I'm enjoying having sex with beautiful women, then now you're a fuckboy, right? And so it's important to me that we also create healthy relationships to sexuality in general and recognize that, like, I remember it was probably the closest, is it? It might be. The closest thing that I've had to a one night stand in Thailand. And it was actually the second time that I'd met her. That's why I don't know if it counts as a one night stand, but the first time I met her, I didn't actually talk to her. I met her at an ecstatic dance. We danced a little bit and then she wound up being a friend of a friend. And then we ended up hooking up. And so my point is, that was my first time ever having that experience of meeting someone that I'd never spoken to before and then sleeping with them in the same night. And the thing about that was the next morning, okay, it was this thing where I consciously actually said, yo, we may never see each other again. We may never see each other again. And so I want to close this out in a really beautiful way and let you know how much, like, I had a great time last night. I enjoyed our intimacy and I deeply appreciate what we shared. And I feel really great about it. And I just wanted to check in with you, how, that sort of thing, and actually sat across each other in bed and closed it out. I'm a ceremonialist, plant medicine, all the things. So I've turned everything into a bit of a ceremony. And it was this experience of, wow, two adults can consensually have sex and then the next morning be so stoked on it and completely unattached to ever even seeing each other again. And that flipped my world upside down because up until that point, I had this belief that it was always going to lead to attachment. It was always going to have something. And so how do you think we can remove a lot of these taboos around sexuality and actually as men and women say, yo, I'm in a space where I want to have sex with people that I find attractive and not be judged as a fuckboy or a slut or whatever it is.
What's up, deep divers? Hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to take a moment to let you know about my new nonprofit, Surrendered Artist. This is a charity organization that I have founded because I want to teach people the power of art as a technology to shift human consciousness. I have spoken about it a lot on this podcast, and now there's an actual organization that is dedicated to spreading this information. It is also aiming to empower artists with tools to shift out of the starving artist archetype and into a surrendered artist archetype. One of those tools is my 4-step creative process called Unlock Your Inner Artist. We have a free gift for you. If you go to surrenderedartist.org/programs, or if you check out the link in the show notes, you'll be able to receive a free multi-page PDF describing this process so that you can go and unlock your inner artist today.
Well, I actually, back to you. I'm curious of like your experience. Do you think that is the norm for what is possible, or that was like just an exception to people who happen to be on the very same page and got lucky? Because in my experience, it's very rare. To my point earlier, you've got past baggage, you've got present intention misalignment. It's very rare that you have two people who are very much on the same page and who can have that, physical interaction and engagement, and there's no misalignment with intention. I've found that to be very rare. I mean, it's like if someone's always going to catch feelings or something like that. Do you think what you just described was lucky, like lightning struck once and it just happened to be two people, right place, right time? Or what do you think? I'm just curious.
I think that I exist in a bubble of what I call the conscious community. Right. So like, for example, she was a Tantra instructor and she, you know what I mean? And so that's a different relationship to sex and sexuality than the average person. Yep. And as I spoke to before with my last relationship and understanding, wow, like the communication I just assumed was what I'm used to because I exist in these bubbles where I travel from like Tulum, Mexico to Bali to Encinitas, California, and these little bubbles where communication and a different relationship to sexuality is more normal. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think another aspect to it is how I approach it. Like I approach it upfront, honest, very communicative from the very beginning. And then a third piece to that is I've basically been traveling nonstop for 3 years, bro. So it's different when you both live in the same city.
Yeah, for sure.
When you meet someone and you're like, yeah, I'm actually only here for 5 or 6 weeks. There's kind of this implied, there's a limit to where this can go. So I think all of those are factors that play into it. And to your point, I think most people are meeting, living in the same city. And so there is kind of an awkward, well, we just had sex. Are we going to do this again? Are we, and there's kind of that aspect.
Got it. Yeah. Super interesting. Yeah. I mean, you're talking, if you're in the same city, you're probably like evolving to like friends with benefits kind of vibes there. If you are like repeating that and you're in that intentional zone, I don't know. It's an interesting topic. Not what I expected to be talking about, but it's super interesting because I feel like a lot of times, like you have two people that, one person might have that really strong intention. The other might not really have an intention, but once that person is like, I'm just exploring myself, sexually, and I'm interested in, a physical relationship, that other person might be like, all right, that sounds good. But then they go into it and then like catch feelings and they aren't communicating that. So it's just a really interesting dynamic. It's like, I mean, I've never had I'm 32 at this point. I mean, I've been around the block a bunch, but I've never experienced like being purely on the same page with someone like in my 20s and like just being like, oh, I'm just going to keep it casual. It was always one of us, I suppose I'm guilty. One of us wasn't able to keep it that way. And that sounds like a bad thing. Like, oh, you weren't able to. Like, I think it's totally fine to adjust your intention throughout. But it's just, it's just super, super interesting that we're talking about that specifically. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, I feel that that's why it's important to have really open communication throughout the process, and why consciousness, meaning your self-awareness, is the most important thing, because are you being honest with yourself first and foremost? That's that's like the biggest thing. Are you being honest with yourself? So for me, I'm out here right now in Asheville, North Carolina, having just gone through a breakup, being single for the first time, having women messaging me, and sitting with the honest question of, do I actually want to hang out with this person, or am I lonely?
Yeah.
And sitting with the actual intention of, okay, this person made it very clear, like, do I want to have sex with this person, or do I, let's put it this way, do I actually think I'll enjoy the presence of this person, or am I putting up with them in order to have sex? You know what I mean? Like these are the questions that I don't think enough people are sitting with to enter into these dynamics consciously and with intention. And if you can be honest, there's not a right or wrong. If I were to say, I'm actually just really lonely, and therefore I realize that I'm probably just putting up with someone that I don't want to be around in order to have some sort of connection. If I were to be honest about that, then I can go into that experience and have the appropriate lens to evaluate my experience from that perspective. But if I'm not being honest with myself and I enter into that lens saying, oh yeah, I'm good, I'm not lonely, all these things, now I've put a false lens on it. And so everything they're saying or doing or what's happening, I'm going to be trying to lie to myself to fit into that fake lens. And I think that is something that I would be encouraging everyone to just, like, if you're lying to yourself, you can feel it. Yep. Right. Yep. And if you don't have practices to uncover that, that's the starting point. Journaling practices. You just released a new journal, if you want to talk about it now, because journaling is one of the biggest ways that I uncover it for myself.
Yeah. Journaling is a great, it forces you to get your emotions out of you. I guess I'm curious, Adam, it's funny that I'm asking you a lot of questions. This is like super interesting topic for me. It's like, what if you do all of that work and you're realizing that, I'm really lonely right now. Do you think it's ever okay to act out of loneliness and be like, I am lonely, but, not screw it, but yeah, I can act out of it. I know where my intention is coming from. I think we talked about it last time. I think when you act out of low energy emotions like desperation or maybe loneliness, like it's going to create the same outcome. So I don't know. I'm just curious, like, is it okay? Like you're doing that soul work, that conscious work, maybe through journaling or whatever, like, is it okay if you're acting out of awareness, but it's an awareness of a negative emotion or a low energy type status? Is it okay to act out of those things?
I think that something you know about me is I don't believe that there's a right or wrong to any situation ever. I think it always comes down to the intention. And so in terms of acting out of the loneliness, if you're feeling lonely, any action that you take to be with that or resolve that is an act from loneliness. Does that make sense? So like, if I say, okay, I'm feeling lonely, I'm going to call my mom. That's an act that you are doing around from that space of how do I be with this loneliness? If you say, I'm feeling really lonely, so I'm going to meditate and journal and dance. Awesome. But that isn't a response to the loneliness that you're feeling. And similarly, I'm feeling lonely, and therefore I'm going to go on this date. Yeah, sure. I think that as human beings, we are designed for connection with other human beings. And so I don't think it's wrong necessarily to desire that connection with someone else. I think that I think the key component here, and maybe this is the real nuance that I'd want people to understand, is
if the loneliness is causing you to take action that's out of alignment with where you desire to be going. Ultimately, that's the real thing. If my mountaintop is like good, nurturing connection, and then out of loneliness, I go and I have sex with someone that let's say I wind up having sex with an ex who I know that's going to cause so much issue and all of this stuff. That's out of integrity with where I say I actually want to go or where I want to be. And I took that action out of loneliness. That for me is where it would be quote unquote wrong or unhealthy, as opposed to, wow, I'm feeling lonely, but here's this woman that we've gone out a couple times and we do have a connection. I enjoy being around her, and I'm just going to reach out and see if she's available tonight.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I spend a lot of time reading like self-development content online, because I like to create my content from a place of reacting to other people's advice. Like I just really like to do that. And one of the things that I see a lot, that's like the opposite of what you just said, but I totally disagree with it. It's like the generic, soundbite advice is you should never act from a place of loneliness. You should never act from a place of pain. If you're not fully healed, you shouldn't be acting. You shouldn't operate from a negative place. And I totally agree with what you said. I think it's, first of all, there's no right answer, but second of all, like you could totally act from those places as long as you're acting with intention towards who you want to be, not acting towards a negative intention about those things. So I think that's totally true. I see that kind of advice all the time. It's like, if you're not fully healed from something, like you shouldn't consider exploring something else. Well, sometimes you have to be in the midst of pain or confusion and bust out of it with some kind of act. And that could mean going out with someone, and it might not work, and it might be even more confusing, but you act out of intention, knowing like where you want to be. I think that's a really strong mentality to have for yourself, versus continuing to hold yourself back because you're still feeling a certain way, you're still attached to a certain feeling.
Yeah. And it's a really great point, because if to say you should never act out of loneliness, to say you should never act out of pain, well, now if you're feeling lonely, what the fuck are you supposed to do? Because you got to take some sort of action. I'm literally going to sit here until I don't feel this thing, because if I eat any food or drink any water while I'm feeling lonely, I'm perpetuating the lonely. No, like you're going to take some form of action because you're honoring what you're actually feeling. Yeah. And anything like that you're feeling is valid. And at the same time too, it's okay. Like for me, one of coming out of a relationship in which I've never felt so small, has been it's been an interesting thing for me to navigate as someone who's really, hopefully it's clear like how much work I've done on myself to become the person that I am. It's difficult for me to describe how much. I tell people all the time, like when it comes to self-love work, when it comes to plant medicine work, when it comes to hiring coaches, when it comes to it's crazy the amount that I've gone into this. And so to be going through this process of, wow, I've never actually felt as small as I have over the last little bit here, has been really interesting for me to navigate. And so for me personally, and this is just, a sensitive share, vulnerable share around it, part of the healing for me has been actually seeing how women respond to me. It's been so powerful for me to have these experiences where even just like at a dinner party or something, having these women very clearly reflecting to me, wow, you're different. There's something, what do you mean you're only here for a week? Like, can't you extend your trip a little bit? Like these little things that have helped me go, oh yeah, it's sometimes really easy to make your whole world the emotion that you're in, and to have some other reference point is incredibly helpful and healing at times. And so
that's great.
That's my own even relationship to it. And I'm very intentional of, wow, okay, I think this is what I said on our conscious dating workshop, which is I will not respond to women who are messaging me if I'm feeling like I need some sort of validation. Like if I'm in that space of loneliness, because what happens then is I'm creating this tether in my mind that women are the way that I get validation. And that's not who I desire to be. However, if I'm going, man, I feel pretty fucking good right now. I've done my thing. I feel whatever. And then I get into an interaction from that space. And from that space, I feel validated in a way. I feel empowered in a way. That is a healthy interaction from my perspective.
Man, I love that. I mean, that's, first of all, that's very mature. I think I strive to be that guy as well. But, it's a winding journey. Yeah, I think that being real, I think a lot of the times, I think we do this thing where it's like, we create these like defense mechanisms for ourselves where we start to deal in absolutes, where it's like, you're either healed or you're not, you're either lonely or you're not. Right. And I think the reality is like, particularly, for you, it's like, I'm curious if you think there'll be a day where you're just like, yep, I'm fully healed from this. I'm ready to go. Or it's going to be kind of a hybrid balance. I think with like loneliness or like, having tendencies to seek validation from someone else, I don't think there's ever a moment where you're like completely one or the other. I think it's always going to be a balance. But I think a lot of times we hold ourselves back in the sense that we think in these absolutes. And that in effect holds us back even more because we're not putting in work. We're not getting the outside perspective, which could be helpful for us. So I think about that a lot. I think a lot of times, particularly after a relationship ends, being, thinking in black and white terms, like binary, it's 1 or 0. You're either healed or you're healed or you're broken, and like you're ready or you're not. But I think maybe we even talked about it last time, but it's like, there's no perfect time for anything. So I am curious because I do talk a lot about breakups and, rejection and things like that. Do you think if like you're in the midst of your healing process, with an intention to continue to heal, and you're in that mentality that you just described of having that perspective of other women, and that's helpful to you. Do you think if you met someone during that where you clearly have a lot more work to do, but that you were like, wow, this person seems meant to be, to our earlier conversation, like what would that decision process be like for you? Would you continue to pursue that even though you have a lot of work to do? Like, right person, wrong time. Like, I'm curious. I don't remember if we talked about that last time, but I'm curious what your take is.
Yeah. I don't believe in right person, wrong time. I don't believe that that's actually a thing. I believe that love is never convenient. Yeah. It's never convenient. And my perspective on this is that love is the force of love is that it's expansive. Like love expands. That's what love does. And so therefore, if you think love is just going to fit into your life and who you are in that moment, then you're trying to take something that is the very gift of it is that it's going to expand you beyond your walls and your boundaries, and you're trying to shove it into that thing and contain it there. Love is by its nature going to require you to expand your boundaries. It's going to require you to shift some of the logistics and the practicalities around how you live your life. That's that invitation that love actually provides, because in so doing, you expand. And I personally, think that, with the healing process, one of the hardest aspects around the healing process is that we call it the healing process, because it implies that we're wounded. It implies that there's something wrong with us that we need to fix. And in reality, instead of the healing process, if we just called it the human process, we'd realize that it's just a process of actually continuing to become more of who we desire to be and let go of the pieces of us that have been our identity up until that point. And so from my perspective, I'm looking at this like, okay, I went through two, like in my last breakup, right? It's different phases. There's the phase of blaming myself for everything. And then there's the phase of blaming her for everything. Yeah. And there's this phase. And so when it comes to what you're talking about in terms of that validation, I think the key is for me to really be identifying, am I wanting the validation to fill a void in me, or am I wanting the validation to, from a space where I actually don't even need it? It just feels good. Like you said, you're a sucker for a compliment. The thing is that if you're coming from a place where you feel so insecure, and so then you're going to design everything around trying to get all of those compliments and be seen in that way and be put on a pedestal. But you're the type of guy, you're confident, you're doing a lot of inner work, all that stuff. So the compliments come to you from a place of not needing it. And so your desire to be like, wow, that feels really good, I think is healthy.
Wow. I love that. I just stole what you wrote down too. It's not the healing process, it's the human process.
Write it on a cup and tag me.
I kind of want. I might. That's like really powerful stuff. Because I think we did. I'm trying to remember. I do this all day, every day. I'm trying to remember what we talked about last time. I think we talked about not having a need to heal, in the sense of not having a need to find closure. It's more about, for one, creating that, and two, a sense of peace and acceptance around whatever it is that's continuing to hold you back. So I love that. I am gonna coffee cup quote that.
Yeah, dope. And I know we're gonna run out of time. The last thing that I'm gonna say on this case is, like, I feel like even in these conversations, we're not relationship experts, right? It's not even that thing. I don't claim to be at all. And yet here I am delivering content that I feel like is very high value and very high level thinking in terms of consciousness that people can apply to their own lives. And I hope that people do. And simultaneously, they're not mistakes, but I acted in ways in my past relationships that led to their eventual end. Like I did things that I look at even in few months ago and go, wow, if in that situation again, I would never do that. I would act so differently. And so what's important for people to understand is we're always learning. That's the thing that a relationship provides, is the opportunity to learn these things. And simultaneously, to bring this kind of full circle, when people enter into a relationship thinking that they are supposed to be interacting with each other as if they've been together for 3 years already, as if the first 2 or 3 months that you have that level of trust and that foundation and that commitment to each other, I think that it creates a really unhealthy dynamic that the evaluation of where you're at becomes right, wrong, black, white, and then people start acting out of fear, and it's that in itself, I think, is just something that I would encourage people to really be paying attention to. Where are you at in your relationship? There's a stage, right? There's a time for you to plant seeds. There's a time for you to bear fruit. There's a time for you to trim the leaves. Like, where are you at in your current relationship, and honor that chapter that you're in.
I love that. I mean, I think it's recognizing too within your own chapter that you're a distinct human going through the human process, and then you're engaging and meeting another human who's also a human going through the human process. And I think some of that, to your point, takes that pressure off the assumption around that journey. So I think that's really, really, really powerful.
Wow. All right, brother. Well, I know you got to head out of here. Why don't you? This has been an epic conversation. I feel like we could have gone on for another 2 hours. I would love to give you the opportunity to just share with everyone how they can follow along with you. You have a new journal out, all of the things that you got going on. Yeah. No, I appreciate you having me. You've got a great community too. I love seeing all the questions and everything. So kudos to everyone. Super simple, Case.Kenny on Instagram. I did just release a new journal the other day, newmindsetwhodis.com. I have a couple at this point. I have a book called Single is Your Superpower, which is kind of a workbook book concept. And then my other 2 journals are 60 days worth of journaling focused on various elements of your mental health and mindsets and calming your anxious thoughts. So something I'm super passionate about. You can pick it up if you'd like. Yeah, thank you very much, Case, for your time. And yeah, shouting out the Create community, all of you who've been on here live. We were on a flow, so we didn't get to any direct questions, but appreciate it. For those of you listening who are thinking, what is the Create community? Well, it is the place, it is the hub for online personal development, coaching, and community and creativity, where these sorts of classes and conversations are happening every single week. So you can go to thecreatecommunity.com if you're interested in finding out more and joining us. And Case, man, it's been an absolute pleasure. I feel every time I talk to you, I'm like, yo, we're gonna continue to weave, bro. We got some good stuff in the future, I think. So I love it. I definitely appreciate the fact that we're now connected, and look forward to just continuing to be in connection with you, bro.
Me too. It's an honor. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Much love, everybody. I want to remind you that always, in all ways, you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. If you got value out of this podcast, I just ask, share it out. Share it out with the world. There's a lot of fire in here that I think would be of benefit to a lot of men and women in this space. So thank you for being deep divers. I love you. Have a blessed day.